way I ate wasn't normal. It wasn't just that I was gluttonous, which was sort of what I had always thought. I was just greedy and fat, and that's how I was. There were moments when I began to see that I just actually was completely out of control.
I've eaten my son's chocolate out of his advent calendar. I've stolen money off my parents to get food in exactly the same way as any other addict would do.
The idea that food, or even the act of eating itself, can be addictive has been floating around the addictions community for a while, but it's very controversial. With increasing levels of obesity, though, researchers are confronting the issue, asking if addiction could be playing a part. I'm Sally Marlowe, and in my day job I work with people addicted to alcohol. In this programme, we're going to explore some of the evidence behind the idea of food addiction and how that relates to the experience of those affected. But the problem with trying to find out if food addiction exists is that even leaving food aside for a moment, experts don't always agree on what's at the core of addiction itself. There's a predominantly psychological view.
An addiction for me is an obsession, a compulsion, something that kind of overrides everything else.
Then there's a more biological, brain-centred view of addiction.
The brain is at the core of addiction because drugs of abuse exert their rewarding effects by stimulating very specific areas of the brain, which with repeated administration damage the areas of the brain that are necessary for self-control.
And then there are those who see addiction as less about the brain and more as a normal pattern of behaviour gone wrong.
I think essentially addiction is a habit problem. And I know a lot of people find it difficult to appreciate that something as apparently powerful and destructive as addiction could be just a habit. But habits can be so powerful.
And there are even more explanations. Addiction as a product of learning, as a matter of choice, as a reflection of the environment or culture, and as a result of a person's genes. And of course, the same can be said for obesity, which for the vast majority of overweight people is not the result of an addiction. But for some, it might be. And what I'm interested in finding out is whether compulsive overeating and addiction might be related, and what implications that might have for treatment. Because if the scientific consensus decides that addiction is the right way to label some people's relationship with food, then might that help or even hinder overeaters like Michael and Louise, whose experience has caused them significant physical and psychological harm for years? We've changed their names to protect their privacy.
Some of my earliest memories are eating, and being in the kitchen, in the dark, family in the living room watching telly with, just the light of the fridge open and sort of fistfuls of cold leftover spaghetti and whatever.
Even as a child?
Oh, yeah, sort of whatever I could find. I remember sitting in the downstairs loo with sort of whole tins of sweet corn, and just eating it and then trying to hide the cans. So it was just kind of always part of my life.
If I had something nice in my mouth, then all my problems weren't there. As long as I was focusing on putting something into my mouth, chewing it, tasting it, swallowing it, then it's like that's the only thing that matters in the world. And also using food, which I think I've done all my life to fix me, to suppress my feelings and to make me feel better.
In my lunch breaks, at work, I would this sort of attempt to look like I was buying food for lots of people so that the person behind the counter wouldn't think that I was actually wanting to eat these meals myself, as if they were remotely interested in me.
There was a feeling of just wanting to be so full, a feeling as if it would be possible to be full, but actually I'd gone past the point of fullness. So it was impossible to get that feeling of just comfortably satisfied by food. And yet I would keep eating and eating and eating. I've eaten regularly, ate so much that I couldn't move because I felt if I moved then I was going to be sick.
It is difficult, I think, for people who don't experience it to understand because, people think, oh, well, everybody overeats occasionally, and we all sort of know. And it's thinking like it's just a sort of bigger version of that, and it's not. It's a completely different experience. It's a constant, daily, minute-to-minute obsession with getting the substance, in my case food, in order to change the way that I feel, because I can't tolerate feeling the way that I feel. Going to the chip shop to buy fish and chips for the family and buying, an extra whatever for me, battered sausage or whatever, and then having to eat it so quickly that nobody would notice, and it would be hot out the fat, and so I would burn my mouth, but I would be eating it on the way home. It was that kind of behaviour that made me begin to think that this is, I'm not just killing myself slowly by eating and being greedy, but they just feels like I'm out of control.
My rock bottom was buying 2 big jars of Quality Street to have in the house to share at Christmas when people were coming round, and then opening one, starting to eat it and thinking, I don't want to do this. I'm thinking, I'm just going to have to finish it so that there won't be any left, and then I won't do it again tomorrow. So forcing myself to eat all these chocolates, and it really was disgusting, And of course then the next day I woke up and opened the other jar and had to eat all of those. It's incredibly painful. It's incredibly painful because we don't understand why we're doing it. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to us or to anybody else.
But some scientists are trying to make sense of these experiences, at least to try and answer the question of whether objectively you can call this sort of behaviour addiction. John Menzies is a research fellow at Edinburgh University's Centre for Integrative Physiology and part of an EU-funded project called NeuroFast.
The overall aim of the project is to understand whether or not food addiction actually exists, and to essentially explore whether eating certain foods can be so pleasurable that it leads to a state of addiction, the sort of state that's similar to that seen with alcohol and drug misuse. In the media, the concept of food addiction has been around for a while now, and it's becoming more and more frequently used. And I think it's possibly dangerous to let the public believe, perhaps, that such a thing is certain to exist. And we're interested in adding to this evidence base to look at evidence for and against the existence of food addiction.
One potential condition where addiction might play a role is called binge eating disorder. Ulrike Schmidt is an eating disorders specialist at the Institute of Psychiatry in London.
Binge eating disorder was first described in the 1950s by an American obesity researcher who noticed amongst his patients with obesity that there was a subgroup of people who had episodes of overeating where they had a sense of losing control over their eating. What he also noticed was that these were the people who had the most severe levels of obesity, and that they often had sort of emotional component to their obesity, anxiety, depression, and often ate for emotional reasons. Over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of interest in this group of people, I think against the background of a rise of obesity in our society.
See, for me as an addiction researcher, this is really interesting because binge eating disorder sounds like, on a very surface level, it has a lot in common with addiction. The lack of control, persisting even though you know it's doing you harm.
We have a subgroup of patients, maybe 10-20%, who will say, it feels to me, I'm so out of control with my eating and my food intake, it feels like I have an addiction and I have no control over what I do with my eating.
But it's not just the experts and their patients who are linking food and addiction. The idea has already taken a hold in the media, but the headlines are pretty sensationalist.
The White Stuff. Are you a secret sugar addict?
The science of junk food addiction.
My addiction to Big Macs almost made me infertile.
Fast food as addictive as heroin.
A lot of media interest focuses on the aspects of food itself, notably fat and more recently sugar. But Ulrike Schmidt, not an animal researcher herself, explains that so far the most convincing evidence is not in humans, but in rats.